I am recording now. Uh, yeah, I'm recording now. Welcome. It's been, I feel like for me, it's been a while since I've read, but also last week was Thanksgiving week. So, start to a brand new week. Okay. Okay. And last off, we left off, Chio-chan, or Sayuri, has seen the chairman again when she was out attending uh, a formal, well, not a formal event, but an event with Mamaha. Hold on. Okay. Yeah. So now, I don't think anything else majorly happened. That's just the last thing that happened that I remember. Hold on just 1 second. Okay. So, yeah. Let me just get comfy. Okay. Yeah. Let's let's get started. I'm just gonna turn it up just a little bit. Okay. So, yeah, she just saw the chairman, and now we are continuing the scene. So now, Sorry, hold on. Okay, yeah, I was just figuring out how much I wanted to read. Sorry about that. Okay, so we leave off at chapter 17, and I'm almost halfway through the book. Almost halfway. It's gonna be a long one. Alright, but yeah. Chapter 17. Chapter 17. I had seen the chairman during. Yeah, I had seen the chairman during only one brief moment in my life, but I'd spent a great many moments since then imagining him. He was like a song I'd heard once in fragments, but had been singing in my mind ever since. Though, of course, the notes had changed a bit over time, which is to say that I expected his forehead to be higher and his gray hair to not so thick. When I saw him, I had a flicker of uncertainty whether he was really the chairman, but I felt so soothed. I knew without a doubt I had found him. While Mamaha was greeting the two men, I stood behind awaiting my turn to bow. I stood behind awaiting my turn to bow. What if my voice, when I try to speak, should sound like a rag squeaking on polished wood? Nobu, with his tragic scars, was watching me, but I wasn't sure whether the chairman had even noticed me there. I was too timid to glance in his direction. When Mama had took her place and began to smooth her kimono over her knees, I saw that the chairman was looking at me with what I took to be curiosity. My feet actually went cold from all the blood that came rushing into my face. Chairman Iwamura, President Nobu, Mama said, This is my new younger this is my new younger sister, Sayuri. I'm certain I'm certain you've heard of the famous Iwamura Ken, founder founder of Iwamura Electric, and probably you've heard of Nobu Toshikazu as well. Certainly, no business partnership in Japan was ever more famous than theirs. They were like a tree and its roots, or a shrine in the gate that stands before it. Even as a 14-year-old girl, I had heard of them, but I'd never imagined for a moment that Iwamura Ken might be the man I'd met on the banks of the Shirakawa stream. Well, I lowered myself to my knees and bowed to them, saying all the usual things about begging their indulgence and so forth. When I was done, I went to kneel in the space between them. Nobu fell into conversation with a man beside him, while the chairman, on the other side of me, sat with his head around an empty teacup on a tray at his knee. Mamaha began talking. Mamaha began talking to him. I picked up a small teapot and held my I picked up a small teapot and held my sleeve out of the way to pour. To my astonishment, the chairman's eyes drifted to my arm. Of course, I was eager to see for myself exactly what he was seeing. Perhaps because of the murky light of perhaps because of the murky light in the exhibition hall. The underside of my arm seemed to shine with the gleaming smoothness of a pearl, and was a beautiful ivory color. No part of my body had ever struck me as lovely in this way before. I was very aware that the chairman's eyes weren't moving. As long as he kept looking at my arm, I certainly wasn't going to take it away. And then suddenly, Mamaha fell silent. It seemed to me she'd stopped talking because the chairman was watching my arm instead of listening to her. Then I realized what was really the matter. The teapot was empty. What was more, it had been empty even when I had picked it up. I'd felt so glamorous a moment earlier, but now I muttered an apology and put the pot down as quickly as I could. Mamaha laughed. "You can see what a determined girl she is, Chairman," she said. "If there had been a single drop of tea in that pot, Sayuri would have gotten it out." "That certainly is a beautiful kimono your younger sister is wearing, Mamaha," said the chairman. The chairman said. "Do I recall seeing it on you, back during your days as an apprentice?" If I felt any lingering doubts about whether this man was really the chairman, I felt them no longer after hearing the familiar kindness in his voice. "It's possible, I suppose," Mamaha replied. "But the chairman has seen me in so many different kimono over the years, I can't imagine he remembers them all." "Well, I'm no different from any other man. Beauty makes quite an impression on me. When it comes to these sumo wrestlers, I can't tell one of them from the next." How does someone do that kind of... I mean, if you really pay attention to people, yeah, you will remember. Yeah, but your memory's not so good, not so reliable, I would say. I know I'm right. Anyway, yeah, when it comes to these sumo wrestlers, I can't tell one of them from the next. Mamaha leaned across, Mamaha leaned across in front of the chairman and whispered to me. What the chairman is really saying is that he doesn't particularly like sumo. "Now, Mamaha," he said, "if you're trying to get me into trouble with Nobu..." "Chairman, Nobu-san has known for years how you feel." "Nevertheless, Sayuri, is this your first encounter with sumo?" I'd been waiting for some excuse to speak with him, but before I'd so much as taken a breath, we were all startled by a tremendous boom that shook the great building. Our heads turned, our heads turned, and the crowd fell silent. But it was nothing more than the closing of one of the giant doors. In a moment, we could hear hinges creaking. In a moment we could hear hinges creaking and saw the second door straining its way around in an arc, pushed by two of the wrestlers. Nobu had his head turned away from me. I couldn't resist peering at the terrible burns on the sides of his face and neck, and at his ear, which was misshapen. When I saw, let me start over from the beginning of that because I wasn't paying attention. I'd been waiting for some excuse to speak with him, but before I'd so much as taken a breath, we were we were all startled by a tremendous boom that shook the great building. Our heads turned and the crowd fell silent, but it was nothing more than the closing of one of the giant doors. In a moment, we could hear hinges creaking and saw the second door straining its way around in an arc, pushed by two of the wrestlers. Nobu had his head turned away from me. I couldn't resist peering at the terrible burns on the side of his face and his neck and at his ear, which was misshapen. Then I saw then I saw that the sleeve of his jacket was empty. I'd been so preoccupied I hadn't noticed it earlier. It was folded in two and fastened to his shoulder like a silver like a long silver pin. I may as well tell you, if you don't know already, that as a young lieutenant, I may as well tell you, if you don't know it already, that as a young lieutenant in the Japanese Marines, Nobu had been severely injured in a bombing outside Seoul in 1910. At the time Korea was being annexed to Japan. I knew nothing about his heroism when I met him, though in fact the story was familiar all over Japan. If he'd never joined up with the chairman, if he'd never joined up with the chairman and eventually become president, if he'd never joined up with the chairman and eventually become president of Iwamura Electric, probably he would have been forgotten as a war hero. But as it was, his terrible injuries made the story of his success that much more remarkable. So the two were often mentioned together. I don't know too much about history, for they taught us only arts at the little school. But I think the Japanese government gained control over Korea at the end of the Russo-Japanese War, and a few years afterward made the decision to incorporate Korea into the growing empire. I'm sure the Koreans didn't like this. I'm sure the Koreans didn't much like this. Nobu went there as part of a small force to keep things under control. Late one afternoon, he accompanied his commanding officer on a visit to a village near Seoul. On the way back to the spot where their horses were tied up, the members of the patrol came under attack. When they heard the horrible shrieking noise of an incoming shell, the commanding officer tried to climb down into a ditch, but he was an old man and moved at about the speed of a barnacle inching its way down a rock. Moments before the shell struck, he was still trying to find a foothold. Nobu laid himself over the commanding officer in an attempt to save him. But the old man took this badly. Yeah, but the old man took this badly and tried to climb out. With some effort, he raised his head. Yeah, with some effort, he raised his head. Nobu tried to push it back down, but the shell struck, killing the commanding officer and injuring Nobu severely. In surgery later that year, Nobu lost his left arm above the elbow. The first time, the first time I ever saw, the first time I saw his pinned sleeve, I couldn't help averting my eyes in alarm. I'd never seen anyone who'd lost a limb, though when I was a little girl, an assistant of Mr. Tanaka's had lost the tip of his finger one morning while cleaning a fish. In Nobu's case, many people felt his arm to be the least of his problems, because the skin was like an enormous wound. It's hard to describe the way he looked, and probably it would be cruel for me even to try. I'll just repeat what I overheard another geisha say about him once. Every time I look at his face, I think of a sweet potato that has blistered in the fire. When the huge doors were closed, I turned back to the chairman to answer his question. As an apprentice, I was free to sit as quietly as an arrangement of flowers, if I wanted to, but I was determined not to let this opportunity pass. Even if I made only the slightest impression on him, like a child's foot might make on a dusty floor, at least it would be a start. The chairman asked if this is my first encounter with sumo. I said, "It is, and I would be very grateful for anything the chairman might be kind enough to explain to me." "If you want to know what's going on," said Nobu, "you better talk to me." "What is your name, apprentice?" I couldn't hear well with the noise of the crowd. I turned away from the chairman with as much difficulty as a hungry child turns away from a plate of food. "My name is Sayuri, sir," I said. "You're Mamaha's younger sister. Why aren't you Mama something or other?" Nobu went on. "Isn't that one of your foolish traditions?" "Yes, sir. But all the names with Mama turned out to be inauspicious for me, according to the fortune teller." "The fortune teller," Nobu said with contempt. "Is he the one who picked your name for you?" "I'm the one who picked it," Mamaha said. "The fortune teller doesn't pick names. He only tells us if they're acceptable." "One day, Mamaha," Nobu replied, "you'll grow up and stop listening to fools." Now, Nobu-san," said the chairman. "Anyone hearing you talk would think you're the most modern man in the nation. Yet I've never known anyone who believes more strongly in destiny than you do." "Every man has his destiny, but who needs to go to a fortune teller to find it? Do I go to a chef to find out if I'm hungry?" Nobu said. "Anyway, Sayuri is a very pretty name, though pretty names and pretty girls don't always go together." I was beginning to wonder if his next comment would be something like, "What an ugly younger sister you've taken on, Mamaha," or some such thing. But to my relief, he said, but to my relief, he said, "Yeah, here's a case where the girl and, yeah, here's a case where the name and the girl go together. I believe she may be even prettier than you, Mamaha. Nobu-san, no woman likes to hear that she isn't the prettiest creature around. Especially you, huh? Especially you, huh? Well, you'd better get used to it. She has especially beautiful eyes. Turn toward me, Sayuri, so I can have another look at them. I couldn't very well look down at the mats, since Nobu wanted to see my eyes, nor could I stare directly back at him without seeming too forward. So after my gaze slipped around a little, like trying to find a footing on ice, I finally let it settle into the region of his chin. If I did, if I could have willed my eyes to stop seeing, I certainly would have done it, because Nobu's features looked like poorly sculpted clay. You must remember that I knew nothing as you must remember that I knew nothing as yet about the tragedy that had disfigured him. When I wondered what happened to him, I couldn't stop that terrible feeling of heaviness. Your eyes certainly do shimmer in the most startling way, he said. At the moment, at that moment, a small door opened along the outside of the hall, and a man entered wearing an exceptionally formal kimono with a high black cap on his head, looking as if he'd stepped directly out of a painting of the imperial court. He made his way down the aisle, leading a procession of wrestlers so huge they had to crouch to pass through the doorway. So, what do you know about sumo, young girl? Nobu asked me. Only that the wrestlers are as big as whales, sir, I said. There's a man working in Gion who was once a sumo wrestler. You must mean Awajiumi. He's sitting just over there, you know. With his one hand, Nobu pointed toward another tier where Awajiumi sat, laughing about something, with Corinne next to him. She must have spotted me, for she gave me a little smile and then leaned in to say something to Awajiumi. He looked in our direction. He was never much of a wrestler, uh, Nobu said. He liked to slam his opponents with his shoulder. It never worked, stupid man, but it broke his collarbone plenty of times. Hold on. Okay. Okay, there we go. I should be better now. Yeah, he was never much of a wrestler, Nobu said. He liked to slam his opponents with his shoulder. It never worked, stupid man, but it broke his collarbone plenty of times. By now, the wrestlers had all entered the building and stood around the base of the mound. One by one, their names were announced, and they climbed up and arranged themselves in a circle, facing the audience. Later, as they made their way out of the hall again, so the wrestlers of the opposing side could begin their procession, Nobu said to me, "That rope in a circle on the ground marks the ring. The first wrestler to be shoved outside it or to touch the mound with anything but his feet is the loser." It may sound easy, but how would you like to try pushing one of those giants over that rope? I suppose I could come up behind him with wooden clampers, I said, and hope to scare him so badly he'd jump out. Be serious, Nobu said. I won't pretend this was a particularly clever thing for me to have said, but it was one of my first efforts at joking with a man. I felt so embarrassed. I couldn't think of I couldn't think what to say. Then the chairman leaned toward me. Nobu-san doesn't joke about sumo. Yeah, Nobu-san doesn't joke about sumo. He said quietly. I don't make jokes about the three things that matter most in life, Nobu said. Sumo, business, and war. My goodness. Yeah, my goodness. I think that was a sort of joke, Mamaha said. Does that mean you're contradicting yourself? If you were watching a battle, Nobu said to me, or for that matter, sitting in the midst of a business meeting, would you understand what was happening? I wasn't sure what he meant, but I could tell from his tone that he expected me to say no. Oh, not at all, I answered. Exactly. And you can't expect to understand what's going on in sumo either. So you can laugh at Mamaha's little jokes, or you can listen to me and learn what it all means. He's tried to teach me about it over the years, the chairman said quietly to me. But I'm a very poor student. The chairman is a brilliant man, Nobu said. He's a poor student of sumo because he doesn't care about it. He wouldn't even be here this afternoon. Yeah, it is. It really is. Yeah, he's a poor student of sumo because he doesn't care about it. He wouldn't even be here this afternoon, except that he was generous enough to accept my proposal that Iwamura Electric be a sponsor of the exhibition. By now, both teams had finished their ring entering ceremonies. Two more special ceremonies followed, one for each of the two yokozuna. A yokozuna is the very highest rank in sumo, just like Mamaha's position in Gion. Yeah, yokozuna is the very highest rank in sumo, just like Mamaha's position in Gion, as Nobu explained it to me. I had no reason to doubt him, but if Mamaha ever took half as much time entering a party as these yokozuna entering the ring, she'd certainly never be invited back. The second of the two was short and had a the second of the two was short and had a most remarkable face. Not at all flabby, but chiseled like stone, and with a jaw that made me think of a squared front and that made me think of the squared front end of a fishing boat. The audience cheered him so loudly I covered my ears. His name was Miyagi Miyagiyama. Yeah, his name was Miyagiyama. And if you know sumo at all, you'll understand why they cheered as they did. He is the greatest wrestler I have ever seen, Nobu told me. Just before the bouts were ready to begin, the announcer listed the winners' prizes. One was the Yeah, one was a considerable sum of cash offered by Nobu Toshikazu, president of the Iwamura Electric Company. Nobu seemed very annoyed when he heard this and said, "What a fool! The money isn't from me. It's from Iwamura Electric." "I apologize, Chairman. I'll call someone over to have the announcer correct his mistake." "There's no mistake, Nobu. Considering the great debt I owe you, it's the least I can do." "The chairman is too generous," Nobu said. "I'm very grateful." Uh, yeah, I'm very grateful. And with this, he passed a sake cup to the chairman and filled it, and the two of them drank together. When the first wrestlers entered the ring, I expected the bout to begin right away. Instead, they spent 5 minutes or more tossing salt on the mound and squatting in order to tip their bodies to one side and raise a leg thigh a leg high in the air before slamming it down. From time to time they crouched, glowering into each other's eyes, but just when I thought they were going to charge, one would stand and stroll away to scoop up another handful of salt. Finally, when I wasn't expecting it, it happened. They slammed into each other, grabbing at loincloths, but within an instant, one had shoved the other off balance and the match was over. The audience clapped and shouted, but Nobu just shook his head and said, "Poor technique." During the bouts that followed, I often felt that one ear was linked to my mind and the other to my heart, because on one side I listened to what Nobu told me, and much of it was interesting, but the sound of the chairman's voice on the other side, as he went on talking with Mamaha, always distracted me. An hour or more passed, and the movement of a brilliant color in Awajiumi's section caught my eye. It was an orange silk flower swaying in a woman's hair as she took her place on her knees. At first, I thought it was Corinne and that she had changed her kimono, but then I saw it wasn't Corinne at all. It was Hatsumomo. To see her there when I hadn't expected her, I felt a jolt as if I'd stepped on an electric wire. Surely it was only a matter of time before she found a way of humiliating me, even here in this giant hall amid hundreds of people. I didn't mind her making a fool of me in front of a crowd, if it had to happen, but I couldn't bear the thought of looking like a fool in front of the chairman. I felt such a hotness. I felt such a hotness in my throat. I could barely even pretend to listen when Nobu began telling me something about the two wrestlers climbing onto the mound. When I looked at Mamaha, she flickered her eyes toward Hatsumomo and then said, "Chairman, forgive me. I have to excuse myself. It occurs to me Sayuri may want to do the same." She waited until Nobu was done with the story, and then "You need to stage an accident for Hatsumomo." "Oh yeah, an accident." She waited until Nobu was done with the story, and then I followed her out of the hall. "Oh, Mama Hassan, she's like a demon," I said. "Corinne left more than an hour ago. She must have found Hatsumomo and sent her here. You ought to feel flattered, really, considering that Hatsumomo goes to so much trouble just to torment you. And broken neck, that would be a terrible accident. Yes, it would be very terrible. Very, very terrible. But that's not gonna happen. But yeah, Corinne left more than an hour ago. She must have found Hatsumomo and sent her here. You ought to feel flattered, really, considering that Hatsumomo goes to so much trouble to torment you. I can't bear to have her make a fool of me here in front of, well, in front of all these people. But if you do, but if you do something she finds laughable, she'll leave you alone, don't you think? Please, Mama Hassan, don't make me embarrass myself. Yeah, don't make me embarrass myself. We had crossed the courtyard and were just about to climb the steps into the building where the toilets were housed, but Mama had led me some distance down a covered passageway instead. When we were out of earshot of anyone, she spoke quietly to me. Nobu-san and the chairman have been great patrons of mine over the years. Heaven knows Nobu can be harsh with people he doesn't like, but he's as loyal to his friends as a retainer is to a feudal lord. And you'll never meet a more trustworthy man. Do you think Hatsumomo understands these qualities? All she sees when she looks at Nobu is Mr. Lizard. That's what she calls him. Mama Hassan, I saw you with Mr. Lizard last night. Oh goodness, you look all splotchy. I think he's rubbing off on you. That sort of thing. Now, I don't care what you think of Nobu-san at the moment. In time, you'll come to see what a good man he is. But Hatsumomo may very well leave you alone if she thinks you've taken a strong liking to him. I couldn't think how to respond to this. I wasn't even sure just yet what Mamaha was asking me to do. Nobu-san has been talking to you about sumo for much of the afternoon, she went on. For all anyone knows, you adore him. Now, put on a show for Hatsumomo's benefit. Let her think you're more charmed by him than you've ever been by anyone. She'll think it's the funniest thing she's ever seen. Probably she'll want you to stay on in Gion just so she can see more of it. But, Mama Hassan, how am I going to make Hatsumomo think I'm fascinated by him? If you can't manage such a thing, I haven't trained you properly, she replied. When we returned to our box, Nobu had once again fallen into conversation with a man nearby. I couldn't interrupt, so I pretended to be absorbed in watching the wrestlers in the mound prepare for their bout. The audience had grown restless. Nobu wasn't the only one talking. I felt such a longing to turn to the chairman and ask if he recalled a day several years ago when he'd shown kindness to a young girl. But of course, I would never say such a thing. Besides, it would be disastrous for me to focus my attention on him while Hatsumomo was watching. Soon, Nobu turned back to me and said, "These bouts have been tedious. When when Miyagi-yama comes out, we'll see some real skill." This, it seemed to me, was my chance to dote on him. But the wrestling I've seen already has been so impressive, I said, and the things President Nobu has been kind enough to tell me have been so interesting. I can hardly imagine we haven't seen the best already. Don't be ridiculous, said Nobu. Not one of these wrestlers deserves to be in the same ring as Miyagi Miyagiyama. Yeah, Miyagiyama. Over Nobu's shoulder, I could see Hatsumomo in a far tier. She was chatting with Awajiyumi and didn't appear to be looking at me. I know this may seem very foolish. Yeah, I know this may seem a very foolish thing to ask, I said. But how can a wrestler as small as Miyagiyama be the greatest? And if you had seen my face, you might have thought no subject had ever interested me more. Interested me more. I felt ridiculous, pretending to be absorbed by something so trivial. But no one who saw us would have known that we weren't talking about. Yeah, but no one who saw us would have known that we weren't talking about the deepest secrets of our souls. I'm happy to say that at that very moment, I caught a glimpse of Hatsumomo turning her head toward me. Miyagi-Yama only looks small because the others are so much fatter, Nobu was saying. But he's very vain about his size. His height and weight were printed in the newspaper perfectly correctly a few years ago, and yet he was so offended he had a friend hit him on the top of the head with a plank, and then gorged himself on sweet potatoes and water, and went down to the newspaper to show them they were wrong. Probably I would have laughed at nearly anything Nobu had said, for Hatsumomo's benefit, I mean. But in fact, it was really quite funny to imagine Miyagi-Yama squinting his eyes shut and waiting for the plank to come banging down. I held that image in my mind and laughed as freely as I dared, and soon Nobu began to laugh with me. We must have looked like the best of friends to Hatsumomo, for I saw her clapping her hands in delight. Soon, I struck upon the idea of pretending that Nobu himself was the chairman. Every time he spoke, I overlooked his gruffness and tried to imagine gentleness instead. Gradually, I found myself able to look at his lips and block from my mind the discoloring and the scars, and imagine that they were the chairman's lips, and that every nuance in his voice was some comment on his feelings about me. At one point, I think I convinced myself I wasn't even in the exhibition hall, but in a quiet room kneeling beside the chairman. I hadn't felt such bliss in as long as I could. Yeah, I hadn't felt such bliss in as long as I could remember. Like a ball tossed in the air that seems to hang motionless before it falls. I felt myself suspended in a state of quiet timelessness. I glanced around the hall. I saw only the beauty of its giant wooden timbers and smelled the aroma of the sweet rice cakes. I thought the state might never end. But then, at some point, I made a comment I don't even remember. And Nobu responded, "What are you talking about? Only a fool could think such an ignorant." Yeah, what are you talking about? Only a fool could think such an ignorant thing. My smile fell before I could stop it. Just as if the strings holding it had been cut. Nobu was looking at me square in the eye. Of course, Hatsumomo sat far away, but I felt certain she was watching us. And then it occurred to me that if a geisha or a young apprentice grew teary-eyed in front of a man, would at most anyone take it for infatuation? I might have responded to this harsh comment with a Yeah, I might have responded to his harsh comment with an apology. Instead, I tried to imagine it was the chairman who had spoken to me so abruptly, and in a moment my lip was trembling. I lowered my head and made a great show of being childish. To my surprise, Nobu said, "I've hurt you, haven't I?" It wasn't difficult for me to sniff theatrically. Nobu went on looking at me for a long time and then said, "You're a charming girl." I'm sure he intended to say something further, but at that moment, Miyagi-yama came into the hall and the crowd began to roar. For a long while, Miyagi-yama and the other wrestler, whose name was Saiho, swaggered around the mound, scooping up salt and tossing it into the ring, or stamping their feet as sumo wrestlers do. Every time they crouched, facing each other, they made me think of two boulders on the point of tipping over. Miyagi-yama always seemed to lean forward a bit more than Saiho. He was taller and much heavier. I thought when they were slam I thought when they slammed into each other, poor Miyagi-yama would certainly be driven back. I couldn't imagine anyone dragging Saiho across that ring. They took up their position 8 or 9 times without either of the men charging. Then Nobu whispered to me, "Hataki Komi! He's going to use Hataki Komi! Just watch his eyes." I did what Nobu suggested, but all I noticed was that Miyagi-yama never looked at Saiho. I don't think Saiho liked being ignored in this way. Because he glowered at his opponent as ferociously as an animal. His jowls were so enormous that his head was shaped like a mountain, and from anger his face had begun to turn red. But Miyagi-yama continued to act as though he scarcely noticed him. It won't last much longer," Nobu whispered to me. And in fact, the next time they crouched on their fists, Saiho charged. To see Miyagi-yama leaning forward as he did, you'd have thought he was ready to throw his weight into Saiho. But instead, he used the force of Saiho's charge to stand back up on his feet. In an instant, he swiveled out of the way like a swinging door, and and his hand came down onto the back of Saiho's neck. By now, Saiho's weight was far forward. He looked like someone falling down the stairs. Miyagi-yama gave him a push with all his force, and Saiho brushed right over the rope at his feet. Then, to my astonishment, this mountain of a man flew past the lip of the mound and came sprawling into the first row of the audience. The spectators tried to scamper out of the way, but when it was over, one man stood up gasping for air because one of Saiho's shoulders had crushed him. Yeah, sorry, I was not paying attention to what I was reading. I got so enveloped in it, and then I was just like, "Wait, what happened?" Um, yeah. Then, to my astonishment, this mountain of a man flew past the lip of the mound and came sprawling right into the first row of the audience. The spectators tried to scamper out of the way, but when it was over, one man stood up gasping for air because one of Saiho's shoulders had crushed him. The encounter had scarcely lasted a second. Saiho must have felt humiliated by his defeat, because he gave the most abbreviated bow of all the losers that day, and walked out of the hall while the crowd was still in an uproar. That, Nobu said to me, is the move called Hatakikomi. Isn't it fascinating? Yeah, isn't it fascinating? Mamaha said, in something of a daze. She didn't even finish her thought. Is it what is it what fascinating? The chairman asked her. What Miyagiyama just did. I'd never seen anything like it. Yes, you have. Wrestlers do that sort of thing all the time. Well, it certainly has got me thinking, Mamaha said. Later, on our way back to Gion, Mamaha turned to me excitedly in the rickshaw. That sumo wrestler gave me a most marvelous idea, she said. Hatsumomo doesn't even know it, but she's just been thrown off balance herself, and she won't even find out until it's too late. You have a plan? Oh, Mamaha-san, please tell it to me. Hold on. Yeah. You have a plan? Oh, Mamaha-san, please tell it to me. Do you think for a moment I would? She said. I'm not even going to tell it to my own maid. Just be sure to keep Nobu-san interested in you. Everything depends on him, and on one other man as well. What other man? A man you haven't met yet. Now, don't talk about it any further. I probably said it more than I should have. I probably said it more than I should have already. It's a great thing you met Nobu-san today. He may just prove to be your rescuer. I must admit, I felt a sickness inside when I heard this. If I was to have a rescuer, I wanted it to be the chairman and no one else. Ooh, and that is the end of that chapter. On to the next chapter. Okay. Chapter 18. Yeah, chapter 18. Take the W where you can? What's the W? Oh, take the wood. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely right. Yeah. That's right. That is a phrase. Okay. So, chapter, uh, chapter 18. Now that I knew the identity of the chairman, I began that very night to read every discarded news magazine I could find in the hopes of learning more about him. Within a week, I'd accumulated such a stack of them in my room that Auntie gave me a look as if I'd lost my mind. I did find mention of him in a number of articles, but only in passing, and none told me the sorts of things I really wanted to know. Still, I went on picking up every magazine I found poking out of the trash basket until one day I came upon a stack of old papers tied in a bundle behind one of the tea houses. Buried in it was a 2-year-old issue of a news magazine that happened to be that happened to feature an article on Iwamura Electric. It seemed that Iwamura Electric had celebrated its 20th anniversary in April of 1931. It astonishes me even now to think of it, but this was the same month when I met the chairman on the banks of the Shirakawa stream. I would have I would have seen his face in all I would have seen his face in all the magazines if I had only looked in them. Now that I knew a date to search for, I managed over the course of time to find many more articles about the anniversary. Many of them came from a collection of junk thrown out after the death of the old granny who lived in an Nokia across the alley. The chairman had been born in yeah, bad habit. Uh, the chairman had been born in 1890, as I learned, which meant that despite his gray hair, he'd been a little over 40 when I met him. I formed the impression that day that he was probably chairman of a unimportant company, but I was quite wrong. Iwamura Electric wasn't as big as Osaka Electric, its chief rival in Western Japan, according to all the articles. But the chairman and Nobu, because of their celebrated partnership, were much better known than the chiefs of much larger companies. In any case, Iwamura Electric was considered more innovative and had a better reputation. At 17, the chairman had gone to work. Hold on. At 17, the chairman had gone to work at a small electric company in Osaka. Soon, he was supervising the crew that installed wiring for machinery at factories in the area. The demand for electric lighting in households and offices was growing at the time, and during the evenings, the chairman designed a fixture to allow the use of 2 light bulbs in a socket built for only one. The director of the company wouldn't build it, however, so at the age of 22, in 1912, shortly after marrying, the chairman left to establish his own company. For a few years after, for a few, for a few years, things were difficult. Then, in 1914, the chairman's new company won the electrical wiring type. The ele- yeah. Then, in 1914, the chairman's new company won the electrical wiring contract for a new building on a military base in Osaka. Nobu was still in the military at this time, since his war wounds made it difficult for him to find a job anywhere else. He was given the task of overseeing the work done by the new Iwamura Electric Company. He and the chairman quickly became friends, and when the chairman offered him a job the following year, Nobu took it. The more I read about their partnership, the more I understood just how well suited they really were to each other. Nearly all the articles showed the same photograph of them, with the chairman in a stylish 3-piece suit of heavy wool, holding in his hand the ceramic 2-bulb socket that had been the company's first product. He looked as if someone had just handed it to him and he hadn't decided what he was going to do with it. His mouth was slightly open, showing his teeth, and he stared at the camera with an almost menacing look, as though he were about to throw the fixture. By contrast, Nobu stood beside him, half a head shorter and at full attention. with his one hand in a fist at his side. He wore a morning coat and pinstriped trousers. His scarred face was completely without expression, and his eyes looked sleepy. Yeah, and his eyes looked sleepy. The chairman, perhaps because he, bec- yeah, the chairman, because perhaps because of his prematurely gray hair and the difference in their sizes, might have might almost have been Nobu's father, although he was only 2 years older. The article said the article said that while the chairman was responsible for the company's growth and direction, Nobu was responsible for managing it. He was the less glamorous man with the less glamorous job. But apparently he did it so well that the chairman often said publicly that the company would never have survived several crises without Nobu's talents. It was Nobu who'd brought in a group of investors and saved the company from ruin in the early 1920s. I owe Nobu a debt I can never repay, the chairman was quoted more than once saying. Several weeks passed, and then one day I received a note to come to Mama's apartment the following afternoon. By this time, I had grown accustomed to the priceless kimono ensembles that Mama's maid usually laid out for me. But when I arrived and began changing into an autumn weight silk of scarlet and yellow, which showed leaves scattered in a field of golden grasses. I was taken aback to find a tear in the back of I was taken aback to find a tear in the back of the gown, large enough to put 2 fingers through. Mamaha hadn't returned yet, but I took the robe in my arms and went to speak to her maid. Tatsumi-san. Yeah, Tatsumi-san, I said. The most upsetting thing, this kimono is ruined. It isn't ruined, miss. It needs to be repaired is all. Mistress borrowed it this morning from Inokia down the street. She must not have known, I said. And with my reputation for ruining kimono, she'll probably think, oh, she knows it's torn. Tatsumi interrupted. In fact, under the robe is... in fact, the underrobe is torn as well, in the same place. I'd already put on the cream-colored robe, and when I reached back and felt the area of my thigh, I saw that Tatsumi was right. Last year, an apprentice geisha caught it by accident on a nail, Tatsumi told me. But Mistress was very clear that she wanted you to put it on. This made very little sense to me. But I did as Tatsumi said. When at last Mamaha rushed in, I went to ask her about it while she touched up her makeup. I told you that according to my plan, she said, 2 men will be important to your future. You met Nobu a few weeks ago. The other man has been out of town until now, but with the help of this torn kimono, you're about to meet him. That sumo wrestler gave me such a wonderful idea. I can hardly wait to see how Hatsumomo reacts when you come back from the dead. Do you know what she said to me the other day? She couldn't thank me enough for taking you to the exhibition. It was worth all her trouble getting there, she said, just to see you making big eyes at Mr. Lizard. I'm sure she'll leave you alone when you entertain him, unless it's to drop by and have a look for herself. In fact, the more you talk about Nobu around her, the better. Though, you're not to mention a word about the man you'll meet this afternoon. I began to feel sick inside when I heard this, even as I tried to seem pleased at what she said. Because, you see, a man will never have an intimate relationship with a geisha who has been the mistress of a close associate. One afternoon in the bathhouse, one afternoon in the bathhouse, not many months earlier, I'd listened. I'd listened as a young woman. I'd listened as a young woman tried to console another geisha who just learned that her new danna would be the business partner of the man she'd dreamed about. It had never occurred to me that I. It had never occurred to me as I watched her that I might one day be in the same position myself. Ma'am, I said, may I ask, is it part of your plan that Nobu-san will one day become my danna? Mamaha answered me by lowering her makeup brush and staring at me in the mirror with a look that I honestly think should have stopped a train. Nobu-san is a fine man. Are you suggesting you'd be ashamed to have him for a danna? She asked. No, ma'am. I didn't mean it that way. I'm just wondering. Very well. Then I have only two things to say to you. First, you're a 14-year-old girl with no reputation whatsoever. You'll be very fortunate ever to become a geisha with sufficient status for a man like Nobu to consider proposing himself as your danna. Secondly, Nobu-san has never found a geisha he likes well enough to take as a mistress. If you're the first, I expect you to feel very flattered. I blushed with so much heat in my face, I might almost have caught fire. Mamaha was quite right. Whatever became of me in the years ahead, I would be fortunate even to attract the notice of a man like Nobu. If Nobu was beyond my reach, how much more unreachable was the how much more unreachable the chairman must be. Since finding him again at the sumo exhibition, I'd begun to think. I'd begun to think of all the possibilities life presented to me. No, let me. Yeah, since finding him again in the sumo exhibition, I had begun to think of all the possibilities life presented to me. But now, after Mamaha's words, I felt myself wading through an ocean of sorrow. Ugh. I dressed in a hurry, and Mamaha led me up the street to the Okia where she had lived until 6 years earlier, when she gained her independence. Yeah, at the door we were greeted by an elderly maid, who smacked her lips and gave her head a shake. We called the hospital earlier, the maid said. The doctor goes home at 4 o'clock today. It's nearly 9:30 already, Yeah, we called the hospital earlier, the maid said. The doctor goes home at 4 o'clock today. It's nearly 3:30 already. We'll phone him before we go, Kazuko-san, Mamaha replied. I'm sure he'll wait for me. I hope so. I hope so. It would be terrible to leave the poor girl bleeding. Who's bleeding? I asked in alarm. But the maid only looked at me with a sigh and led us up the stairs to a crowded little hallway on the second floor. In a space about the size of two tatami mats were gathered not only Mamaha and me, as well as the maid who'd shown us up, but also three other young women and a tall, thin cook in a crisp apron. They all looked at me warily, except for the cook, who draped a towel over her shoulder to wet a knife of of the sort used to chop the heads off fish. I grabbed a slab. I felt like a slab of tuna the grocer had just delivered, because I could see now that I was the one who was going to do the bleeding. Mama Hassan, I said. Now, Sayuri, I know what you're going to say, she told me, which was interesting because I had no idea myself what I was going to say. Before I became your older sister, didn't you promise to do exactly as I told you? If I'd known it would include having my liver cut out, no one's going to cut out your liver. Yeah, no one's going to cut out your liver, said the cook, in a tone that was supposed to make. Uh, yeah, no one's going to cut out your liver, said the cook, in a tone that was supposed to make me feel better, but didn't. Sayuri, we're going to put a little cut in your skin, Mama said. Just a little one, so you can go to the hospital and meet a certain doctor. You know the man I mentioned to you? He's a doctor. Can't I just pretend I have a stomach ache? I thought I was perfectly, yeah, I was perfectly serious when I said this, but everyone seemed to think I'd made a clever joke, for they all laughed. Because even Mamaha. Sayuri, we all have your best interests at heart, Mamaha said. We only need to make you bleed a little, just enough so the doctor will be willing to look at you. In a moment, the cook finished sharpening the knife and came to stand before me as calmly as if she were going to help me with my makeup, except that she was holding a knife, for heaven's sake. Kazuko, the elderly maid who'd shown us in, pulled my collar aside with both hands. I felt myself beginning to panic, but fortunately, Mamaha spoke up. We're going to cut We're going to put the cut on her leg, she said. Not the leg, said Kazuko. The neck is so much more the neck is so much more erotic. Sayuri, please turn around and show Kazuko the hole on the back of your kimono, Mamaha said to me. When I'd done as she asked, she went on. Now, Kazuko-san, how will we explain this tear in the back of her kimono if the cut is on her neck and not her leg? How are the two things related? Kazuko said. She's wearing a torn kimono and she has a cut on her neck. I don't know what. Well, yeah, putting a cut on the neck is really dangerous. It's very dangerous. Yeah, how are the two things related? Kazuko said. She's wearing a torn kimono and she has a cut on her neck. I don't know what Kazuko keeps gabbing on about, the cook said. Just tell me where you want me to cut her. Yeah, just tell me where you want me to cut her, Mamaha, and I'll cut her. I'm sure I should have been pleased to hear this, but somehow I wasn't. Mamaha sent one of the young maids to fetch a red pigment stick. Yeah, a red pigment stick of the sort used for shading the lips, and then put it through the hole in my kimono, and swiftly rubbed a mark uh, high up on the back of my thigh. You must place the cut exactly there, Mamaha said to the cook. I opened my mouth, but before I could even speak, Mamaha told me, just lie down and be quiet, Sayuri. If you slow us down any further, I'm going to be very angry. I'd be lying if I said I wanted to obey her, but of course, I had no choice. So I lay down on a sheet spread out on the wooden floor and closed my eyes while Mamaha pulled my robe up until I was exposed almost to the hip. Remember that if the cut needs to be deeper, you can always do it again, Mamaha said. Start with the shallowest cut you can make. I bit my lip. I bit my lip the moment I felt the tip of the knife. I'm afraid I may have let out a little squeal as well, though I can't be sure. In any case, I felt some pressure, and then Mamaha said, Not that shallow. You've scarcely cut through the first layer of the skin. It looks like lips, Kazuko said to the cook. You've put a line right in the middle of the red smudge, and it looks like a pair of lips. The doctor's going to laugh. Mamaha agreed and wiped off the makeup after the cook assured her she could find the spot. In a moment, I felt, uh, in a moment, I felt the pressure of the knife again. I'd never been good at the sight of blood. You may recall how I fainted after cutting my lip the day after. Uh, you may recall how I fainted after cutting my lip. Uh, you may recall how I fainted after cutting my lip the day I met Mr. Tanaka. So you can probably imagine how I felt when I twisted around and saw of blood, a rivulet of blood, snaking down my leg onto a towel Mama held against in. Good night. Okay. Um. Yeah, so you can probably imagine how I felt when I twisted around and saw a rivulet of blood snaking down my leg onto a towel Mamaha held against the inside of my thigh. I lapsed into such a state when I saw it that I have no memory at all of what happened next, of being helped into the rickshaw or of anything at all about the ride until we neared the hospital and Mamaha rocked my head from side to side to get my attention. Now listen to me. Now listen to me. I'm sure you've heard over and over that your job as an apprentice is to impress other geisha, since they're the ones who will help you in your career, and not to worry about what the men think. Well, forget all about that. It isn't going to work that way in your case. Your future depends on two men, as I've told you, and you're going to meet one of them. You must make the right impression. Are you listening to me? Yes, ma'am. Every word, I muttered. When you're asked how you cut your leg, the answer is you were trying to go to the bathroom in kimono and you fell onto something sharp. You don't even know what it was because you fainted. Make up all the details you want. Just be sure to sound very childish and act helpless when we go inside. Let me see you do it. Well, I laid my head back down and let my eyes roll up into my head. I suppose that's how I was really feeling. But Mamaho wasn't at all pleased. I didn't say act dead. I said act helpless. Like this. Mamaha put on a dazed look, as if she couldn't make up her mind whether she uh, as if she couldn't make up her mind even where she should point her even where she should point her eyes, and kept her hand to her cheek as though she were feeling faint. Hold on. Okay. She made me imitate that look until she was satisfied. I began my performance as the driver. I began my performance as the driver helped me to the entrance of the of the hospital. Mamaha walked beside me, tucking my robe this way and that to be sure I still looked attractive. We entered through the swinging we entered through the swinging wooden doors and asked for the hospital director. Mamaha said she Mamaha said he was expecting us. Finally, a nurse showed us down a long hallway to a dusty room with a wooden table and a plain folding screen blocking the windows. While we waited, Mamaha took off the towel she'd wrapped around my leg and threw it into a wastebasket. Remember Sayuri. She remember Sayuri. She almost hissed. We want the doctor to see you looking as innocent and as helpless as possible. Lie back and try to look weak. I'm gonna turn this down a little bit. Oh god. Yeah, right there is good. Should be good. Yeah, it's good. Anyway, we want the doctor to see you looking as innocent and as helpless as possible. Lie back and try to look weak. I had no difficulty at this at all. Yeah, I had no difficulty at all with this. A moment later, the door opened and in came Dr. Crab. Of course, his name wasn't really Dr. Crab, but if you'd seen him, I'm sure the same name would have occurred to you, because he had his shoulders hunched up and his elbows sticking out so much he couldn't have done a better imitation of a crab if he'd made a study of it. He even led with one shoulder when he walked, just like a crab walking along sideways. He had a mustache on his face and was very pleased to see Mamaha, though more with hold on, sorry, I just gotta do something. Gotta see something real quick. Now that I've reminded myself of it just now. Oh, so I just need to plug in my thing. What was I gonna do? Yeah, he even led. Uh, he even led with one shoulder when he walked, just like a crab moving along sideways. He had a mustache on his face and was very pleased to see Mamaha, though more with an though more with an impression of surprise, an expression of surprise in his eyes than with a smile. Dr. Crab was a methodical and orderly man. When he closed the door, he turned the handle first so the latch wouldn't make noise. Then and then gave an extra press on the door to be sure it was shut. After this, he took a case from his coat pocket and opened it very cautiously, as though he might spill something if he wasn't careful. But all but all it contained was another pair of glasses. When he'd exchanged the glasses he wore, he replaced the case in his pocket and then smoothed his coat with his hands. Finally, he purred. Finally, he peered at me and gave a brisk little nod, whereupon Mama said, "I'm so sorry to trouble you, Doctor, but Sayuri has such a bright future before her, and now she's had the misfortune of cutting her leg. What with the possibility of scars and infections and the like, well, I thought you were the only person to treat her." "Just so," said Dr. Crab. "Now perhaps I might have a look at the injury?" "I'm afraid Sayuri gets weak at the sight of blood, Doctor," Mama said. "It might be best if she simply turned away and let you examine the wound for yourself. It's on the back of her thigh." "I understand perfectly. Perhaps you'd be kind enough to ask that she lie on her stomach for the on the examination table." I couldn't understand why Dr. Crab didn't ask me himself, but to seem obedient, I waited until I had heard the words from Mama. Then the doctor raised my robe almost to my hips and brought over a cloth and some sort of smelly liquid. Yeah. Yeah, then the doctor raised my robe almost to my hips and brought over a cloth and some sort of smelly liquid, which he rubbed on my thigh before saying, "Sayuri-san, please be kind enough to tell me how the wound was inflicted." I took a deep, exaggerated breath, still doing my best to seem as weak as possible. "Well, I'm rather embarrassed," I began. "But the truth is that I was drinking a good deal of tea this afternoon." Sayuri had just begun her apprenticeship, Mama said. I was introducing her around Gion. Naturally, everyone wanted to invite her in for tea. "Yes, I can imagine," the doctor said. "In any case," I went on, "I suddenly felt that I had to, well, you know, drinking excessive amounts of tea can lead to a strong urge to relieve the bladder," the doctor said. "Oh, thank you. And in fact, well, strong urge is an understatement because I was afraid that in another moment everything would just look yellow to me, if you know what I mean." "Just tell the doctor what happened, Sayuri," said Mama. "I'm sorry," I said. "I just mean to say that I had to use the toilet very bad. So that so bad that when I reached so bad that when I finally reached it, well, I was struggling with my kimono, and I must have lost my balance. When I fell, my leg came against something sharp. I don't even know what it was. I think I must have fainted." "It's a wonder you didn't void your bladder when you lost consciousness," said the doctor. All this time I'd been lying down on my stomach, holding my face up off the examination table, for fear of smudging my makeup, and talking while the doctor looked at the back of my head. But when Dr. Crab made this last comment, I looked over my shoulder at Mamaha as best I could. Happily, she was thinking faster than I was, because she said, "What Sayuri means to say is that she lost her balance when she tried to stand once again from, from a squatting position." "I see," the doctor said. "The cut was made by a very sharp object. Perhaps you fell on broken glass or a strip of metal?" "Yes, it certainly felt very sharp," I said. "As sharp as a knife." Dr. Crab said nothing more, but washed the cut as though he wanted to see how much he could make it hurt, and afterward used more of the smelly liquid to remove the blood that had dried all down my leg. Finally, he told me the cut would need nothing more than cream and a bandage, and gave me instructions on caring for it over the next few days. With this, he rolled my robe back down and put away his glasses as though he might break them if he handled them too roughly. "I'm very sorry you've ruined such a fine kimono." "Yeah, I'm very sorry you've ruined such a fine kimono," uh, he said. "But I'm certainly happy at the chance to have met you. Mama-san knows I'm always interested in new faces." "Oh no, the pleasure is all mine, Doctor," I said. "Perhaps I'll see you one evening quite soon at the Ichiriki tea house." "To tell the truth, Doctor," Mamaha said, "Sayuri is a bit of a special property, as I'm sure, I'm sure, I'm sure you can imagine. She already has more admirers than she can handle, so I've been keeping her away from the Ichiriki as much as I can. Perhaps we might visit you at the Shirai tea house instead?" "Yes, I would prefer that myself," Dr. Crab said, and then he went through the whole ritual of changing his glasses again so that he could look through a little book he took from his pocket. "I'll be there. I'll be there. Let me see. 2 evenings from now. I do hope to see you." Mamaha assured him we would stop by, and then we left. In the rickshaw on our way back on to Gion, Mamaha told me I'd done very well. "But Mamaha-san, I didn't do anything." "Oh, then how do you account for what we saw on the doctor's forehead?" "I didn't see anything but the wooden table right in front of my face." "Let's just say that when the doctor was cleaning the blood from your leg, his forehead was beaded with sweat, as if we'd been in the heat of summer. But it wasn't even warm in the room, was it?" "I don't think so." "Well then," Mamaha said. I really wasn't sure what she was talking about, or exactly her purpose, or or exactly what her purpose had been in taking me to meet the doctor. For that matter, I couldn't very well. For that matter, I couldn't. Let me say that again. She still doesn't get it. Poor girl. She's 14, man. She only has a crush on one guy. She's probably just thinking about that. Yeah, you're right, you're right. Yeah, I really wasn't sure what she was talking about, or exactly what her purpose had been in taking me to meet the doctor, for that matter. But I couldn't very well ask, because she had already made it clear she wasn't going. Yeah, but I couldn't very well ask, because she'd already made it clear she wouldn't tell me her plan. Just then, just as the rickshaw driver was pulling us across the Shijo Avenue Bridge into Gion once again, Mamaha interrupted herself in the middle of a story. You know, you know, uh, ugh. you know, your eyes are really, your eyes really are extraordinarily lovely in that kimono, Sayuri. The scarlets and yellows. They make your eyes shine almost silver. Oh heavens, I can't. Oh heavens, I can't believe I haven't thought of this idea sooner. Driver, she called out. We've gone too far. Stop here, please. You told me Gion Tomina Tominagacho, ma'am. I can't drop the pole. I can't drop the poles in the middle of a bridge. You may either let us out here or finish crossing the bridge and then take us back over it again. Frankly, I don't see much point in that. The driver set down his poles where they were, and Mamaha and I stepped out. A number of bicyclists rang their bells in anger as they passed down, but Mamaha didn't seem in the least concerned. I suppose she was so certain of her place in the world, she couldn't imagine anyone being troubled by a little matter like her blocking traffic. She took her time, holding up one coin after another from her silk change purse until she paid the exact fare, and then led me back across the bridge in the direction we'd come. We're going to Uchida Kosaburo's Uchida. Yeah, we're going to Uchida Kosaburo's studio, she announced. He's a marvelous artist, and he's going to take a liking to your eyes. I'm sure of it. Sometimes he gets a little distracted, you might say, but his studio is a mess. Yeah, and his studio is a mess. It may take him a while to notice your eyes, but just keep them pointed where he can see them. I followed Mamaha through side streets until we came to a little alley. At the end stood a bright red Shinto gate, miniature in size, pressed tightly between two houses. uh, yeah, I followed Mamaha through side streets until we came to a little alley. Yeah, we came. Yeah, I followed Mamaha through side streets until we came to a little alleyway. At the end stood a bright red Shinto gate, miniature in size, pressed tightly between two houses. Beyond the gate, We pressed between several small pavilions to a flight of stone steps leading up through the trees in their brilliant fall coloring. The air wafting from the dank little tunnel of the steps felt as cool as water, so that it seemed to me I was entering a different world altogether. I heard a swishing sound that reminded me of the tide washing washing the beach, but it turned out to be a man in his back. But it turned out to be a man with his back to us, sweeping water from the top step with a broom whose bristles. Yeah, I heard a swishing sound that reminded me of the tide washing the beach, but it turned out to be a man with his back to us, sweeping water from the top step with a broom whose bristles were the color of chocolate. Why, Uchida-san, Mama said, don't you have a maid to tidy up for you? The man at the top stood in full sunlight, so that when he turned to peer down at us, I doubt he knew anything more than a few shapes under the trees. I could see him well, however, and he was quite a peculiar looking man. In one corner of his mouth was a giant mole, like a piece of food, and his eyebrows were so bushy they looked like caterpillars that had crawled down out of his hair gone gone to sleep there. Everything about him was in disarray, not only his gray hair, but his kimono, which looked as if he'd slept in it the night before. Who is that? He asked. Uchida-san, after all these years, you still don't recognize my voice? Yeah, after all these years, you still don't recognize my voice? If you're trying to make me angry, whoever you are, you're off to a good start. I'm in no mood for interruptions. I'll throw this broom at you if you don't tell me who you are. Uchida-san looked so angry I wouldn't have been surprised if he bit the mole from the corner of his mouth and spat it at us. Yeah, Uchida-san looked so angry. I wouldn't have been surprised if he bit off the mole from the corner of his mouth and spat it at us. But Mama had just continued right up the stairs, and I followed her, though I was careful to stay behind so she would be the one struck by the broom. Is this how you greet your Is this how you greet visitors, Uchida-san? Mama said as she stepped up into the light. Uchida squinted at her. So it's you. Why can't you just say who you are like everyone else? Here, take this broom and sweep the steps. No one's coming into my house until I've lit incense. Another of my mice have died. Yeah, another of my mice has died, and the place smells like a coffin. Mamaha seemed amused at this and waited until Uchida had left before leaning the broom against a tree. Have you ever had a boil? She whispered to me. When Uchida's work goes badly, he gets into this terrible mood. You have to make him blow up, just like lancing a boil, so that he'll settle down again. But yeah, you have to make him blow up, just like lancing a boil, so that he'll settle down again. If you don't give him something to get angry about, He'll start drinking and only get worse. Does he keep pet mice? I whispered. He said another of his mice has died. Heavens no. He leaves his ink sticks out, and the mice come and eat them and then die from poisoning. I gave him a box to put his inks in, but he won't use it. Just then, Uchida's door rolled partway open, for he'd given it a shove and gone right back inside. Mamaha and I slipped out of our shoes. The interior was a large room in the style of a farmhouse. I could see incense burning in the far corner, but it hadn't done any good yet, because the smell of dead mouse struck me with as much force as if someone had stuck clay up my nose. The room was even messier than Hatsumomo's at its worst. Everywhere were long brushes, some broken or not, and big wooden boards with half-finished drawings in black and white. In the midst of it all, was an unmade futon with ink stains on the sheets. I imagined that Uchida would have ink stains all over himself as well. But when I turned to find out, he said to me, "What are you looking at?" "Uchida-san, may I present my younger sister, Sayuri," Mamaha said. "She's come with me all the way from Gion for the honor of meeting you." All the way from Gion wasn't really very far, but in any case, I knelt on the mats and went through the ritual of bowing and begging for Uchida's favor, although I wasn't convinced he'd heard a word of what Mamaha had told him. "I was having a fine day until lunchtime," he said, "and then look what happened." Uchida crossed the room and held up a board. Fastened onto it with pins was a sketch of a woman from the back, looking from one side and holding an umbrella, except that a cat had evidently stepped in the ink and walked across it, leaving perfectly formed paw prints. The cat himself was curled up asleep at the moment in a dirty pile of clothes. I brought him in here for the mice, and look," he went on. "I've a mind to throw 'em out." "Oh, but the paw prints are lovely," said Mamaha. "I think they may improve the picture. What do you think, Sayuri?" I wasn't inclined to say anything because Uchida was looking very upset at Mamaha's company. Yeah, because I wasn't inclined to say anything because Uchida was looking very upset at Mamaha's comment. But in a comment, I understood that she was trying to lance the boil, as she had put it. So I put on my most enthusiastic voice and said, I'm surprised at how attractive the paw prints are. I think the cat may be something of an artist." "I know why you don't like him." "Yeah, I know why you don't like him," said Mamaha. "You're jealous of his talent." "Jealous, am I?" Uchida said. "That cat's no artist. He's a demon, if he's anything." "Forgive me, Uchida-san," Mamaha replied. "It's just as you say. But tell me, are you planning to throw the picture away? Because if so, I'd be pleased to have it. Wouldn't it look charming in my apartment, Sayuri?" When Uchida heard this, he tore the picture from the board and said, "You like it? You like it, do you? All right. I'll make you 2 presents of it." And then he tore it into 2 pieces and gave them to her, saying, "Here's one, And here's the other. Now get out. I so wish you hadn't done that, Mamaha said. I think it was the most beautiful thing you've ever produced. Get out! Oh, Uchida-san, I can't possibly. I wouldn't be a friend if I didn't straighten your place a bit before leaving. At this, Uchida himself stormed out of the house, leaving the door wide open behind him. We watched him kick the broom Mamaha had left leaning against the tree and nearly slip and fall as he started down the wet steps. We spent the next half hour straightening up the studio, until Uchida came back in a much improved mood, just as Mamaha had predicted. Fine, I'll leave. Yep. uh, yeah, until Uchida came back in a much improved mood, just as Mama had predicted. He still wasn't what I would call cheerful. In fact, he had a habit of chewing constantly at the mole in the corner of his mouth, which gave him the look of being worried. I think he felt embarrassed at his earlier behavior, because he never looked directly at either of us. Soon it became apparent that he wasn't going to notice my eyes at all, and so Mamaha said to him, "Don't you think Sayuri is just the prettiest thing? Have you even bothered to look at her?" It was an act of desperation, I thought, but Uchida only flicked his eyes at me like brushing a crumb from a table. Mamaha seemed very disappointed. The afternoon light was already beginning to fade, so we both rose to leave. She gave the most abbreviated bow in saying goodbye. When we stepped outside, I couldn't help stopping a moment to take in the sun. I couldn't help stopping a moment to take in the sunset, which painted the sky behind the distant hills in rests of pink and breasts and pinks as striking as the loveliest kimono. Even more so, because no matter how magnificent a kimono is, your hands still never glow orange in its light. But in that sunset, my hands seemed to have been dipped in some sort of iridescence. I raised them up and gazed at them for a long moment. "Mama Hassan, look," I said to her, but she thought I was talking about the sunset, and when I turned toward it with indifference. Yeah, but she thought I was talking about the sunset, and turned toward it with indifference. Uchida was standing frozen in the entryway, with an expression of concentration on his face, combing one hand through a tuft of his gray hair. But he wasn't looking at the sunset at all. He was looking at me. If you've ever seen Uchida Kosaburo's famous ink painting of the young woman in a kimono, standing in a rapturous state and with her eyes aglow, well, from the very beginning, he insisted the idea came from what he saw that afternoon. I've never really believed him. I can't imagine such a beautiful painting could really be based on just a girl staring foolishly at her hands in the sunset. And that is the end of that chapter. And we'll go another chapter because why the fuck not? It's probably going to take an hour just because I have I just know it'll take, it's like 9 pages. Oh no, it's 10 pages. So yeah, it'll probably take an hour. So, chapter 19. 19. That startling month in which I first came upon the chairman again, and met Nobu and Mr. Crab and Uchida Kosaburo. Yeah, Kosaburo, made me feel something like a pet cricket that has last escaped its wicker cage. For the first time in ages, for the first time in ages, I could go to bed at night believing I might not always strong as little notice in Guion as a drop of tea spilled onto the mats. I still had no understanding of Mamaha's plan or of how it would lead me to success as a geisha, or whether success as a geisha would ever lead me to the chairman. But every night, I lay on my futon with his handkerchief pressed against my cheek, reliving again and again my encounter with him. I was like a temple bell that resonates long after it has been struck. Some weeks passed without word of any of the men, and Mamaha and I began to worry. But at last, one morning, a secretary from Iramura Electric phoned the Ichiriki Tea House to request my company for that evening. Mamaha was delighted at this news, because she hoped the invitation had come from Nobu. I was delighted too. I hoped it was from the chairman. Later that day, in Hatsumo's presence, I told Auntie I would be entertaining Nobu and asked her to help me choose a kimono and ensemble. To my astonishment, Hatsumomo came along to lend a hand. I'm sure that a stranger seeing us would have imagined we were members of a close family. Hatsumomo never snickered or made sarcastic comments, but in fact, she was helpful. I think Auntie felt as puzzled as I did. We ended up settling on a powdery green kimono with a pattern of leaves in silver and vermilion, and a gray obi with gold threads. Hatsumomo promised to stop by so she could see Nobu and me together. That evening, I knelt in the hallway of the Ichiriki, feeling that my whole life had led me to this moment. I listened to the sounds of muffled laughter, wondering if one of the voices was the chairman's, and when I opened the door and saw him there at the head of the table, and Nobu with his back to me, well, I was so captivated by the chairman's smile, though it was really only the residue of laughter from a moment earlier, that I had to keep myself from smiling back at him. I greeted Mamaha first, and then the few other geisha in the room, and finally the 6 or 7 men. When I arose from my knees, I went straight to Nobu, as Mamaha expected me to do. I must have knelt closer to him than I realized, however, because he immediately slammed his sake cup onto the table in annoyance and shifted a little distance away from me. I apologized, but he paid me no attention, and Mamaha only frowned. I spent the rest of the time feeling out of sorts. Later, as we were leaving together, Mamaha said to me, "Nobu-san is easily annoyed. Be more careful not to irritate him in the future." "I'm sorry, ma'am. Apparently he isn't as fond of me as you thought." "Oh, he's fond of you. If he didn't like your company, he would have left the party. You'd have left the party in tears." Sometimes his temperament seems as gentle as a sack of gravel, but he's a kind man in his way, as you'll discover. I was invited to the Ichiriki Tea House again that week by Iwamura Electric, and many times over the weeks that followed, and not always with Mamaha. She cautioned me not to stay too long for fear of making myself look unpopular, and so after an hour or so, I always bowed and excused myself as though I were on my way to another party. Often, while I was dressing for these evenings, Hatsumomo hinted she might stop by, but she never did. Then, one afternoon, when I wasn't expecting it, she informed me that she had some free time that evening and would be absolutely certain to come. I felt a bit nervous, as you can imagine, but things seemed still worse. But things seemed still worse when I reached the Ichiriki and found that Nobu was absent. It was the smallest party I'd attended yet in Gion, and only two other geisha, with two other geisha, with only two other geisha and four men. What if Hatsumomo should arrive and find me entertaining the chairman without Nobu? I made no headway in thinking what to do. I made no headway in thinking what to do when suddenly the door slid open, and with a surge of anxiety, I saw Hatsumomo there on her knees in the hallway. My only recourse, I decided, was to act bored, as though the company of no one but Nobu could possibly interest me. Perhaps this would have been enough to save me that night, but by good fortune, Nobu arrived a few minutes afterward in any case. Hatsumomo's lovely smile grew the moment Nobu entered the room, until her lips were as rich and full of drops of blood beating at the edge of a wound. Nobu made himself comfortable at the table, and then at once, Hatsumomo suggested in an almost maternal way that I go and pour him sake. I went to settle myself near him and try to show all the signs a girl. I went to settle myself near him and try to show all the signs of a girl enchanted. Whenever he laughed, for example, I flicked my eyes toward him as though I couldn't resist. Hatsumomo was delighted and watched us so openly that she didn't even seem aware of all the men's eyes upon her, or more likely, she was simply accustomed to that attention. Or simply, or more likely, she was simply accustomed to the attention. She was captivatingly beautiful that evening, as she always was. The young men at the end of the table did little more than smoke cigarettes and watch her. Even the chairman, who sat with his fingers draped gracefully around the sake cup, stole glances of her from time to time. I had to wonder if men were so blinded by beauty that they would feel privileged to live their lives with an actual demon, so long as it was a beautiful demon. I had a similar. Okay. Uh, yeah. I had to wonder if men were so blinded by beauty they would that they would feel privileged to live their lives with an actual demon, so long as it was a beautiful, so long as it was a beautiful demon. I had a sudden image in my mind of chairman. Yeah, I had some. I had a sudden image in my mind of the chairman stepping up into the formal entrance hall of Aokia late one night to meet Hatsumomo, holding a fedora in his hand and smiling down at me as he began to unbutton his overcoat. I didn't think he'd ever really be so entranced by her beauty as to overlook the traces of cruelty that would show themselves. But one thing was certain: if Hatsumomo ever understood my feelings for him, she might very well try to seduce him, if for no other reason than to cause me pain. Suddenly, it felt Suddenly, it seemed urgent to me that Hatsumomo leave the party. I knew she was there to observe the developing romance, as she put it, so I made up my mind to show her what she'd come to see. I began to touch my fingertips to my neck or my hairstyle every so often in order to seem worried about my appearance. When my fingers brushed one of my hair ornaments inadvertently, I came up with an idea. I waited until someone made a joke, and then, while laughing and adjusting my hair, I leaned toward Nobu. Adjusting my hair was a strange thing for me to do, I'll admit, since it was waxed into place and hardly needed attention. But my purpose was to dislodge one of my hair ornaments, a cascade of yellow and orange safflowers in silk, and let it fall into Nobu's lap. As it turned out, the wooden spine holding the ornament in my hair was embedded farther than I'd realized, but I managed to slip it out at last, and it bounced against Nobu's chest and fell onto the tatami between his crossed legs. Most everyone noticed, and no one seemed to know what to do. I'd planned to reach into his lap and reclaim it with a girlish embarrassment, but I couldn't reach, but I couldn't bring myself to reach in between his legs. Nobu picked it up himself and turned it slowly by its spine. "Fetch the young maid who greeted me," he said. "Tell her I want the package I brought." I did what Nobu asked and returned to the room to find everyone waiting. He was still holding my hair ornament in the spine, so that the flowers dangled down above the table, and made no effort to take the package from me when I offered it to him. "I was going to give it to you later, on your way out, but it looks as if I meant to give it to you now," he said, and nodded toward the package in a way that suggested I should open it. I felt very embarrassed with everyone watching, but I unfolded the paper wrapping and opened the little wooden box inside to find an exquisite yeah, uh, yeah, I felt very embarrassed with everyone watching, but I unfolded the paper wrapping and opened the little wooden box inside to find an exquisite ornamental comb on a bed of satin. The comb, the in the shape of a half circle, was a showy red color adorned with bright flowers. "It's an antique I found a few days ago," Nobu said. The chairman, who was gazing wistfully at the ornament in its box on the table, moved his lips, but no sound came out at first until he cleared his throat and said, with a strange sort of sadness, "Why, Nobu-san, I had no idea you were so sentimental." Hatsumomo rose from the table. I thought I'd succeeded in ridding myself of her, but to my surprise, she came around and knelt near me. I wasn't sure what to make of this, until she removed the comb from the box and carefully inserted it into my hair just at the base of the large pincushion-like bun. She held out her hand, and Nobu gave her the ornament of dangling safflowers, which she replaced on my hair as carefully as a mother tending to a baby. I thanked her with a little bow. "Isn't she just the loveliest creature?" she said, speaking pointedly to Nobu. And then she gave me a very theatrical sigh, as though these few moments were as romantic as any she'd experienced, and left the party as I'd hoped she would. It goes without saying that men can be as distinct from each other as shrubs that bloom in different times of the year. Because although Nobu and the chairman seemed to take an interest in me within a few weeks of the tournament, several months passed and still we heard nothing from Dr. Crab or Uchida. Mamaha was very clear that we ought to wait until we heard from them, rather than finding some pretext for approaching them again. But at length, she could she could bear the suspense no longer, and went to check on Uchida one afternoon. It turned out that shortly after we'd visited him, his cat had been bitten by a badger and within a few days was dead from infection. Uchida had fallen into another drinking spell as a result. For a few days, Mamaha visited to cheer him up. Finally, when his mood seemed to be turning the corner, she dressed me in an ice blue kimono with multicolored ribbons embroidered at the hem, with only a touch of Western style makeup to accentuate angles, as she put it, and sent me to him bearing a present of a pearl white kitten that had cost her I don't know how much money. I thought the kitten was adorable, but Uchida paid little attention and instead sat squinting his eyes at me, shifting his head this way and that. A few days later, the news came that he wanted me to model in his studio. Mamaha mentioned me not to speak a word to him, and sent me off chaperoned by her maid Tatsumi, who spent the afternoon nodding off in a drafty corner while Uchida moved me from spot to spot, frantically mixing his inks and painting a bit on rice paper before moving me again. If you were to go around to Japan and see the various works Uchida produced while I modeled for him during that winter and the years that followed, such as one of his lovely surviving oil paintings hanging in the boardroom of the Sumitomo. Yeah, such as the one of his only surviving oil paintings hanging at the boardroom of the Sumitomo, hanging in the boardroom of the Sumitomo Bank of Osaka. You might imagine it was a glamorous experience to have posed for him, but actually nothing could have been duller. Most of the time I did little more than sit uncomfortably for an hour or so. Mainly, I remember being thirsty, because Uchida never once offered me anything to drink. Even when I took to bring my own tea in a sealed jar, he moved it to the other side of the room so it wouldn't distract him. Following Mamaha's instructions, I tried never to speak a word, even one bitter afternoon in the middle of February, when I probably should have said something and didn't. Uchida had come to sit right before me and stare at my eyes, chewing on the mole in the corner of his mouth. He had a handful of ink sticks. He had a handful of ink sticks and some water that kept icing over. But no matter how many times he ground ink in various combinations of blue and gray, he was never quite satisfied with the color and took it outside to spill it into the snow. Over the course of the afternoon, as his eyes bored into me, he became more and more angry and finally sent me away. I didn't hear a word from him. I didn't hear a word from him for more than 2 weeks, and later found out he'd fallen into another drinking spell. Mama had blamed me for letting it happen. As for Dr. Crab, when I first met him, he'd as much as as for Dr. Crab, when I first met him, he'd as much as promised to see Mamaha and me at the Shirai tea house. And yet, as late as 6 weeks afterward, we hadn't heard a word from him. Mamaha's concern grew as the weeks passed. I still knew nothing of her plan for catching Hatsumomo off balance, except that it was like a gate swinging on 2 hinges, one of which was Nobu, and the other of which was Dr. Crab. What she was up to with Uchida, I couldn't say, but it struck me as a separate scheme, certainly not in the very center of her plans. Finally, in late February, Mamaha ran into Dr. Crab at the Ichiriki tea house and learned that he'd been consumed with the opening of a new hospital in Osaka. Now that most of the work was behind him, he hoped to renew my acquaintance at the Shirai tea house the following week. You'll recall that Mama had claimed I would know it. You'll recall that Mamaha had claimed I would be overwhelmed with invitations if I showed my face at the Ichiriki. This is why Dr. Crab asked that we join him at the Shirai instead. Shirai. At the Shirai tea instead. Mamaha's real motive was to keep clear of Hatsumomo, of course, and yet as I prepared to meet the doctor again, I couldn't help feeling uneasy that Hatsumomo might find us anyway. But the moment I set my eyes on the Shirai, I nearly burst out laughing, for it was certainly a place Hatsumomo would go out of her way to avoid. It made me think of one shriveled little blossom on a tree in full bloom. Gion continued to be a bustling community even during the last years of the Depression, but the Shirai tea house, which had never been important to begin with, had only withered further. The only reason a man as wealthy as Dr. Crab patronized such a place is that he hadn't always been so wealthy. During his early years, the Shirai was probably the best he could do. Just because the Ichiriki finally welcomed him didn't mean he was free to sever his bond with the Shirai. Or the Shirai. I've been pronouncing it wrong. Yeah, the Shirai. Yeah, just because the Ichiriki finally welcomed him didn't mean he was free to sever his bond with the Shirai. When a man takes a mistress, he doesn't turn around and divorce his wife. That evening in the Shirai, I poured sake while Mama had told a story, and all the while Dr. Crab sat with his elbows sticking out while Dr. Crab sat with his elbows sticking out so much that he sometimes bumped one of us with them and turned to nod in apology. He was a quiet man, I discovered. He spent most of his time looking down at the table through his little round glasses, and every so often slipped pieces of just Okay. Yeah. Uh, sorry, I got distracted. uh, yeah. He was a quiet man, as I discovered. He spent most of his time looking down at the table through his little round glasses, and every so often slipped pieces of sashimi underneath his mustache in a way that made me think of a boy hiding something beneath a floor covering. When we finally left that evening, I thought we failed and wouldn't see much of him, because normally a man who'd enjoyed himself so little wouldn't bother coming back to Guillaume. But as it turned out, we heard from Dr. Crab the next week, and nearly every week afterward over the following months. Things went along smoothly with the doctor until one afternoon in the middle of March when I did something foolish and very nearly ruined all Mama's careful planning. I'm sure many a, I'm sure many a young girl has spoiled her prospects in life by refusing to do something expected of her, or by behaving badly toward an important man, or some such thing. But the mistake I made was so trivial. I wasn't even aware I'd done anything. It happened in the Okia during the course of about a minute. Not much, not long after lunch, one cold day, while I knelt on, while I knelt. Oh shit! Sorry for that noise, man. For the YouTube audience, very sorry for that noise. Yeah, I'm just sorry for all the noises I make that are very, very loud. Okay. Uh, where was I? Oh yeah, it happened in the Nokia during the course of about a minute. Not long after lunch one cold day, while I knelt on the wooden walkway with my shamisen, Hatsumomo was strolling past on her way to the toilet. If I had shoes, I would have stepped down onto the corridor to get out of her way. But as it was, I could do nothing but struggle to get up from my knees, with my legs and arms nearly frozen. I could do nothing but struggle to get up from my knees, with my legs and arms nearly frozen. If I'd been quicker, Hatsumomo probably wouldn't have bothered speaking to me. But during that moment, while I rose to my feet, she said, "The German ambassador's coming to town, but Pumpkin isn't free to entertain him. Why don't you ask Mamaha to arrange for you to take Pumpkin's place?" After this, she let out a laugh as if to say that the idea of my doing such a thing was as ridiculous as serving a dish of acorn shells to the emperor. The German ambassador was causing quite a stir in Guion at the time. During this period, in 1935, a new government had recently come to power in Germany, and though I had never understood much about it politics, I do know that Japan was moving away from the United States during these years, and was eager to make a good impression on the new and was eager to make a good impression on the new German ambassador. Everyone in Guion wondered who would be given the honor of entertaining him during his upcoming visit. When Hatsumomo spoke to me, I ought to have lowered my voice in shame and made a great show of lamenting the misery of my life compared with Pumpkin's. But as it happened, I had but as it happened, I had just been musing about how much my prospects seemed to have improved and how successfully Mamaha and I had kept her plan had kept her plan from Hatsumomo, whatever plan she whatever her plan was. My first instinct when Hatsumomo spoke was to smile, but instead I gave my but instead I kept my face like a mask and felt pleased with myself that I'd given nothing away. Hatsumomo gave me an odd look. I ought to have realized right then that something has passed through her mind. I quickly stepped to one side and she passed me. That was the end of it, as far as I was concerned. Then a few days later, Mamaha and I went to the Shirai tea house to meet Dr. Crab once again. But as we rolled open the door, we found Pumpkin slipping her feet into her shoes to leave. I was so startled to see her. I wondered what on earth could possibly have brought her there. Then Hatsumomo stepped down into the entryway as well, and of course I knew. Hatsumomo had outsmarted his Hatsumomo had outsmarted us somehow. "Good evening, Mama Hassan," Hatsumomo said. "And look who's with you! It's the apprentice the doctor used to be so fond of." I'm sure Mamaha felt as shocked as I did, but she didn't show it. "Why, Hatsumomo-san," she said, "I scarcely recognize you. But my goodness, you're aging well." Hatsumomo wasn't actually old. She was only 28 or 29. I think Mamaha was just looking for something nasty to say. "I expect you're on your way to see the doctor," Hatsumomo said. "Such an interesting man. I only hope he'll still be happy to see you." "Well, goodbye." Hatsumomo looked cheerful as she walked away, but in the light from the avenue, I could see a look of sorrow on Pumpkin's face. Mamaha and I slipped out of her shoes without speaking a word. Neither of us knew what to say. The Shirai's gloomy atmosphere seemed as thick as the water in a pond that night. The air smelled of stale makeup. The damp plaster was peeling in the corners of the rooms. I could have given anything to turn around and leave. When we slid open the door from the hallway, we found a mistress. When we slid open the door from the hallway, we found the mistress of the tea house keeping Dr. Crab company. Usually she stayed a few minutes after we'd arrived, probably to charge the doctor for her time. But tonight she excused herself the moment we entered and didn't even look up as she passed. Dr. Crab sat sitting with his back facing us, so we skipped the formality of bowing and went instead to join him at the table. "You seem tired, Doctor." "No," Mamaha said. How are you feeling this evening?" Dr. Crab didn't speak. He just twirled his glass of beer on the table to waste time, even though he was an efficient man and never wasted a moment if he could help it. "Yes, I am rather tired," he said at last. "I don't feel much like talking." And with that, he drank down the last of his beer and stood to leave. Mamaha and I exchanged looks. When Dr. Crab reached the door to the room, he faced us and said, I certainly do not appreciate when people I have trusted turn out to have misled me. Afterward, he left without closing the door. Mamaha and I were too stunned to speak. At length, she got up and slid the door shut. Back at the table, she smoothed her kimono and then pinched her eyes closed in anger and said to me, "All right, Sayuri, what exactly did you say to Hatsumomo?" "Mama Hassan, after all of this work, I promise you I would never do anything to ruin my own chances. The doctor certainly seems to have thrown you aside as though you know better than an empty sack. I'm sure there's a reason, but we won't find it out until we know what Hatsumomo said to him tonight." "How can we possibly do that?" "Pumpkin was here in the room. You must go to her and ask." I wasn't at all sure Pumpkin would speak to me. To speak, I wasn't at all sure Pumpkin would speak with me, but I said I would try. And Mama Ha seemed satisfied with this. She stood and prepared to leave, but I stayed where I was until she turned to see what was keeping me. "Mama Hassan, may I ask a question?" I said. Now, Now Hatsumomo knows I've been spending time with the doctor, and probably she understands the reason why. Dr. Crab certainly knows why. You know why. Even Pumpkin may know why. I'm the only one who doesn't. Why don't you be kind enough to explain your plan to me?" Mamaha looked as if she felt very sorry I'd asked this question. For a long moment, she looked everywhere but at me, and she finally let out a sigh and knelt at the table again to tell me what I wanted to know. "You know perfectly well," she began, "that Uchida-san looks at you with the eyes of an artist. But the doctor is interested in something else, and so is Nobu. Do you know what that something is? Do you, yeah, do you know what it is meant? Yeah, do you know what it, do you know what is meant by the homeless eel?" I had no idea what she was talking about, and I said so. "Men have a kind of, well, an eel on them," she said. "Women don't have it, but men do. It's located—" "I think I know what you're talking about," I said, "but I didn't know it was called an eel." "It isn't an eel, really," Mama said, but it's an eel makes things so much easier to understand. So let's think of it that way. Here's the thing. This eel spends its entire life trying to find a home. And what do you think women have inside them? Caves, where the eels like to live. This cave is where the blood comes from every month when the cloud passes over the moon, as we sometimes say. I was old enough to understand what Mama Han meant by the passage of clouds over the moon, because I had been experiencing it for a few years already. The first time, I couldn't have felt more panicked if I'd sneezed and found pieces of my brain in the handkerchief. I really was afraid I might be dying, until Auntie had found me washing out a bloody rag and explained that bleeding was just part of being a woman. "You may not know this about eels," Mamaha went on, "but they're quite territorial. When they find a cave they like, They wriggle around inside it for a while just to be sure that, well, to be sure it's a nice cave, I suppose. And when they've made up their minds that it's comfortable, they mark the cave as their territory by spitting. Do you understand? If Mama had simply told me what she was trying to say, I'm sure I would have been shocked, but at least I'd have an easier time sorting it all out. Years later, I discovered that things had been explained to Mamaha in exactly the same way by her own older sister. Here's the part that's going to seem very strange to you, Mamaha went on, as if as if what she'd already told me didn't. Men actually like doing this. In fact, they like it very much. There are even men who do little in their lives besides search for different caves to let their eels live in. A woman's cave is particularly special to a man if no other eel has ever been in it before. Do you understand? We call this Mizuwage. We call what Mizuwage? The first time a woman's cave is explored by a man's eel. That is what we call Mizuwage. Now, Mizu means water, and age means raise up or place on. So that the term Mizuwage sounds as if it might have something to do with raising up water or placing something on the water. If you get three geisha in a room, all of them will have different ideas about where the term comes from. Now that Mamaha had finished her explanation, I felt only more confused, though I tried to pretend it all made a certain amount of sense. I suppose you could guess why the doctor likes to play around in Guion, Mamaha continued. He makes a great deal of money in his hospital, except for what he needs to support his family. Except for what he needs to support his family. He spends it in the pursuit of Mizuwage. It may interest you to know, Sayuri-san, that you are precisely the sort of young girl he likes best. I know this very well, because I was one myself. As I later learned, a year or two before I had come to Guion, Dr. Crab paid a record amount for Mamaha's Mizuwage, maybe 7,000 or 8,000 yen. This may not sound like much, but at the time, it was a sum that even someone like Mother, who's very thought about money and how to get more of it, might only see once or twice in a lifetime. Mamaha's Mizuwage had been so costly partly because of her fame, but there was another reason, as she explained to me that afternoon. Two very wealthy men had bid against each other to be her Mizuwage patron. One was Dr. Crab. The other was a businessman named Fujikado. Ordinarily, men didn't compete this way in Guion. They all knew each other and preferred to reach agreement on things. But Fujikado lived on the other side of the country and came to Guion only occasionally. He didn't care if he offended Dr. Crab, and Dr. Crab, who claimed to have some aristocratic blood in him, hated self-made men like Fujikado, even though, in truth, he was a self-made man too, for the most part. When Mamaha noticed at the sumo tournament that Nobu had seemed taken with me, she thought at once of how much Nobu resembled Fujikado, self-made, and, to a man like Dr. Crab, repulsive. With Hatsumomo chasing me around like a housewife chasing a cockroach, I certainly wasn't going to become famous the way Mamaha had. Yeah, yeah, I. Yeah, with Hatsumomo chasing me around like a housewife chasing a cockroach, I certainly wasn't going to become famous the way Mamaha had, and end up with an expensive Mizuwage as a result. But if these two men found me appealing enough, they might start a bidding war, which could put me in the same position to repay my debts as if I had been a popular apprentice all along. This was what Mama had meant by catching Hatsumomo off guard. Hatsumomo was delighted that Nobu found me attractive. What she didn't realize was that my popularity with Nobu would very likely drive up the price of my Mizuwage. Certainly, we had to reclaim Dr. Crab's affections. Without him, Nobu could offer what he wanted for my Mizuwage. That is, if if he turned out to have any interest in it at all. I wasn't sure he would, but Mamaha assured me that a man doesn't cultivate a relationship with a 15-year-old apprentice geisha unless he has her Mizuwage in mind. You can bet it isn't your conversation he's attracted to, she told me. I tried to pretend I didn't feel hurt by this. And that is the end of that chapter. I hope you guys enjoyed the progression of this wild story. Things are getting heated. Well, I will see you next time. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate you guys. Even if most of you don't comment, it's fine. Thank you. Bye bye.